question mark is, are 10% of the PV plants really underperforming by 10%? It's something that I heard after the PVRW, which happened last week, and you know, it's it was maybe not said exactly like that on the spot, but there are a couple of reports that we see that yeah, there is a tale of plants which are underperforming. We heard also Genia and the PVR results showing that about 10%, you know, same 10% of modules are failing. There's probably something there. Despite you know, most of the larger tax equity players, IEs, having some guidelines on how to do due diligence, you know, best practices, sometimes checklist. I've seen also when I talk to banks, I see some very interesting things, and for instance, I've heard about some point systems where you know, if you do some more due diligence, then you get more points, and then after some time you get, if you have enough points, then you can be the bank accepts to lend money for this particular project, and all of them include some factory audits and production supervision, but we will see that in this at least that's one of the hopefully the takeaways of this presentation is that well, there are different types, and it's not all to say, well, we're doing factory audits and production supervision to guarantee quality. Another thing which you know, tends to make me believe that standardization is helpful and important for the industry. I mean, we've heard Joe like an hour ago explaining that in depth, but it's very clear that there are many cooks in the kitchen, and not only for the C&I market, also for the utility scale project developers, EPCs. They may all have their own practices, their own ideas of what should happen. So it's a good idea to have some kind of standardization. So we're proposing on the next slide, we've looked at actually some of our one of our co-founders is coming from other industries and has been doing that for more than 20 years. And then when he entered PV, he said, well, you know, there are a lot of prior art on how to properly mitigate the risks of procurement. And I would like to share that with you today. So this is the image that you're going to see repeating in this presentation. And every time we're going to focus on one or the other aspect. But the three main elements are assessments of both suppliers and products, then qualification of both suppliers and products, and then control and issuance of a certificate of conformity. But let's start with the assessment and let's see what it looks like. So if you go to the next slide, we will zoom in onto the assessment of the suppliers, and then on the next slide, we go a little bit deeper into that. So the assessment is a process which is quantitative. We're not talking at this stage about a pass-fail. What we're talking about is assessing the risk level and giving a score. So for that, audits are the right tools. Audits are typically not a pass-fail exercise. The auditor will evaluate the risk and will put will put a score to what? Well, to some things. And the most typical audits that we see, it's also important to realize that are quality management system audits and process audits. And typically we are asked to go to the factory, to the workshop, and to the production line that is going to be used for the clients. But if you go to the next slide, you will see that actually, you know, you can, these are just one set of KPIs. Yeah, if you go to the next slide, you see that there are many other KPIs that you can consider while you are doing this assessment of suppliers. Can you please go to the next slide? Thank you. So when when we look at suppliers, there are many ways of looking at them. And for instance, Guido a little bit earlier today from IFC showed us what their own KPIs are, and they are a little bit they are certainly different from other players, other buyers, and other lenders in the industry. So we are offering a set of audits, and if you look on the right hand side, you see that we are offering quality management system audits, but also environmental management system audit, OH&S system, social responsibility management system audits, and a number of advanced assessments, which could be quite well spread. Like for instance, the process audit. Almost everyone is going to use a process audit to evaluate their manufacturing, the manufacturing capability of their supplier. But also maybe other may be more interested in the roadmap. Other may be more interested maybe in how they the capability to develop a product. So maybe laboratories or R&D facilities. Also, and that is actually some audits that we have started rolling out, and they are getting a lot of traction right now because of forced labor allegations in Western China. Supply chain exposure risk assessment, supply chain audit in general, traceability, security, all these things are very important KPIs for some of our customers. One thing to note is that the audit scores are actionable if the audits are performed relatively long before manufacturing. So typically, audit scores are actionable when they are used for benchmarking suppliers. Audit scores and finding lists, which are basically the two deliverables that you have from an audit, are actionable during contractual processes. You want to make sure in the contract that you have no gap and you let no finding unresolved. And finding lists are also interesting or useful when you're designing the control phase. So make sure during the control phase, which is the third phase, actually, if you go to the next slide, you will see again the same, and then you see the green one. So can you go back just one more before, please? Yes, you see that the green on the right is the control phase. So you can take the results of the audit to educate the control phase and design a control phase accordingly. And this is true for the audits, so for the supplier's assessment, but it's also true for the product assessment. So typically product assessment in this methodology is testing, and Genia showed exactly what PVL is doing just a couple of minutes ago. This is also the type of things that we recommend, doing a thorough testing of the products long before in advance. It's called product qualification program. Genia, don't be mad at me for that, but it's actually more of an assessment at this point of the product. The qualification comes in the next phase, where based on the assessments that you're doing on the product, so the assessment is going to be a score or a quantitative degradation rate, for instance, and then during the qualification you will say, okay, now I know that this module will degrade that much. Will I take it or not? That is when you're doing the qualification. And if you go to the next slide, that sums it up a little bit. The qualification becomes no, sorry, yeah, no, go before. Yeah, the qualification becomes quantitative. It's really that becomes the pass fail. So some of the so you have a set of requirements, and you want both the suppliers and the product to get into these requirements. So let's move on from the qualification quite fast, because I do indeed want to go to the control side, and then if you move then to the control side, indeed, thank you. Then the control is actually also qualitative. It's also a pass fail. It is kind of too late to give a score to your supplier, to your product. You've already signed to buy it. So you cannot, it's not very actionable to say, ah, yeah, it was actually an okay or a not so okay product. That's not what it's about. What it's about is to say, okay, well, you've signed up for a product now. Let's make sure that that you get exactly what you have. And typically, one of the risks is, as Junior mentioned, when PVEL or STS, for that matter, started, the price of the modules were 10 times as much. So there was it was a little bit easier to bring quality. Now with such a very high volume and very pressure on very strong pressure on prices, it's much more difficult to bring quality at scale. So that is what it's about. That is what the control is about. The control is to say, okay, I've tested my module through the PQP. I've qualified it, so I know that this is what I want. Well, is it indeed what I'm receiving? And for that, we're doing all the steps that you have on the slides here: production planning, production supervision, final quality check, and dispatch. All of these are independently and quite orthogonally testing or probing different risks. And then if I look at the production planning phase, there's something called pre-production inspection that sometimes is referred to in the industry as pre-production audits, but it's a little bit misleading because, again, that's not the place where you want to give a score. That's not the right place to have a score at this moment. What you're checking here is really the manufacturing readiness. So you want, and the manufacturing readiness is typically covered through inspection, like standard inspection method, such as one of them is called the 6M method, where you will check the readiness of the processes, the readiness of the materials, the readiness of the testing equipment. All these things will be checked. And of course, you want, it's a pass-fail. So if it fails, then you should. Well, the manufacturer needs to solve the whole points before production can start, and that is why we have this notice to proceed right after the pre-production inspection. So if you go to the next slide, you will also see that it's not because you get a pass during this control that you will get quality. So please go to the next slide, slide 14. I have taken 3 examples. Let's wait until the slides pops up. Thank you. So I've taken 3 examples, actually quite recent examples, where, well, in the 3 cases, you may remember the QCP that I was talking to you about at the very beginning. Well, these are 3 examples where the QCP was very loose, and therefore the manufacturer or the modules may have gotten a pass. However, the quality is not what a lender or a developer or long-term owner will want to see on their modules. So the first example, as you see, there are some dark marks which resemble very much what was shown in the past. This is typically, so it can happen in the field, but this is also usually observed in very commonly observed, I would say, in manufacturing. They are defects of soldering. And just to give you an example, this is, if you take STS quality control plan, then none of these modules would have passed. But the quality control plan of this, and I want to insist on that.
Yeah, question mark
one,
is are 10%
well, even
of the
for the
TV
top
plans,
5 manufacturer. The quality control plan that they have chosen for this particular project allowed up to 7 of such defects on a module like that. So that's one example. Another example is another manufacturer, another developer, but almost the same issues. There we discovered actually these defects in the field, where we were asked to go and do some electroluminescence in the field, and we said, well, there are not too many cracks on your modules. However, you have a bunch of manufacturing defects, and these modules were not even commissioned. the plant was not in commercial operations. So we tried to investigate a little bit further and ask for the manufacturer through the developer to share the QCP to check whether it was acceptable according to their own criteria. And we actually could not even get to the QCP of the manufacturer. So somehow, I think Guido was Guido Agostinelli from IFC was talking about what was it? Bankable supply contracts. I think that's what we're talking about here as well. So in the contract of your supply agreements, if you don't have any mention to the QCP that is going to be used, basically you can put as much control as you want. It's not going to be very efficient. And the last example is same thing in the QCP. It was written that this manufacturer would let pass at up to 1% of critical defects, and critical defects are defined as either safety hazard or just simply not working. These are the definition of critical defects. So this one, fortunately, we managed to capture before it was executed. But contracts matters for that things. So that brings me to the next slide, where I present the risk in a matrix way. In fact, I call it the quality control matrix, where you have two dimensions. The first dimension is, okay, do you do or not some, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So the first dimension is the horizontal dimension in this graph, where whether you do or not some quality control, and typically how much of quality control do you do, all the elements that I presented, like final quality control, production supervision, all these things. But there is another dimension, which is how do you enforce it? What are the criteria that you're using? And this one, when you put it graphically like that, you realize that they are actually even more important than the scope that you're doing. And all these things are actually defined before production, during the QCP negotiation or the choice of the inspector, for that matter. Talking about which, I'll in the next 3 slides, I will put 3 recommendations to make sure to bring every contract into the green zones. And the first one that I want to bring in is about the choice of the inspectors. So if you go to the next slide, while he's going, thank you. So at STS, we are actually losing about 1 gigawatt worth of QAQC per year, simply because in some instances, the manufacturer manages to choose their own inspector. So that may seem surprising, but that is what's happening. And sometimes it may be because in the contract they have a clause that say that, for instance, the inspector need to be selected by mutual agreement or something like that. And then they use this clause, which is a little bit tricky, to impose their own inspector. And okay, that is immediately a risk, of course, when you're choosing the one that is going to judge on whether you do a good job or not. There's definitely a risk. So there are a couple of options to avoid that, and one of them is to ask systematically to have your inspector being an accredited inspection body. In fact, no one would use a non-accredited electrician to certify their house electricity network. No one would even use a non-accredited PV lab to test their modules. So in the PV industry, accreditation is also very well understood. So no one should use a non-accredited inspection body in the exact same vein. So that's the first thing that I would recommend, is to have make sure that your contract does not allow your manufacturer to your supplier to choose their own judge. Next slide is about really the criteria and the requirements, and that I hope will echo what Joe in the same session identified as a need. There's a need for standard criteria and requirements, and we have actually identified that already a few years ago. And that's why in 2019, in 2018, we issued a standard, an industry standard, which is called STS STD PVM1, which has been reviewed now by more than 100 stakeholders. And that is a basis, a good basis, accepted and version controlled, like every standard should be, that can be used for criteria and requirements. It includes all what you see above, so that is the scope, but it also includes hundreds of criteria and requirements on EL images and things like that. And in fact, it also includes the fact that you receive at the end, when you apply the standard, like all standards, you're receiving a certificate of conformity. And this certificate of conformity can be used to reconcile the different needs of the different stakeholders. When we were talking about too many cooks in the kitchen, that is something that can be used to say, okay, well, let's all agree on something like that. We will have the certificate of conformity at the end by an inspection body, which is trustworthy and impartial, and that's what we're going to use to demonstrate that the modules have been manufactured with the high level of quality that you expect. And then the last example that I want to give is about the scope this time. So if you go to the next slide, we've seen, we've entered, STS has been, let's say, more intensively entering the US markets only, less than a year ago. And what we see is that a lot of the practices today are for a relatively low level of production supervision, and I think that is 50% or even 20% we hear, and I think that is a little bit maybe misguidance or at least a misconception. We do believe that on the opposite, night shifts are riskier than day shift production. And actually, we looked at our data, database, and this is the very summarized summary of what our database says. And there are more than 100,000 data points in these two blocks. Basically, our conclusion is that you are twice as likely to have a finding in the night shifts than in day shifts. So we do believe that it's important to be in the factory 24/7 for our industry today. And actually, this is over 4 years, and we don't see any trend. It doesn't go up nor down in the years. So if you go to the next slide, which summarizes all these recommendations, you see that if you want to go from the red to the green, you certainly want to choose a QCP. Make sure that the manufacturer does not use the QCP for you, and for that matter, also does not choose the inspector. One way of avoiding that is to ask for a standardized QCP, as STS STD PVM1 does the trick, and to ask for an impartial inspector, and the ISO 17020 accreditation does the trick. And now for the scope, we do recommend 24/7. I want to say that loud because we have plenty of examples where it has been very useful for our clients. Actually, 80% of our clients are using 24/7 inspection, even in India, which is probably the most cost-sensitive market. And then if you want to have something that you can really rely on, we also suggest to use the STS STD PVM1 scope. The standard has both the scope and the criteria that you need. So, and then if you go to the very next slide, which is the conclusion or the takeaways, best practices ask for assessment, qualification, and control. Factory audits are a great tool for assessment, but they are more actionable if you do them before production. And then QAQC standardization is important and can support bankability, and we suggest to use the STS STD PVM1 standard, which is available and has been reviewed by more than 100 stakeholders.